Kia ora everyone and welcome to Humankind. Today I'm going to explain culture. This is not the culture from Civilization, this is not culture as you're familiar with it, so it's really important that we discuss what it is. I'm going to take you through the different elements of a culture, what defines a culture in Humankind, and then we'll go through some examples of cultures later in the video. Firstly, culture in Humankind is an incredibly important part of the game. Culture is most akin to what we might consider to be civs or civilizations from other game. Once you enter the ancient era, you will be prompted to choose between different historical cultures. Each era in the game presents some new cultures for you to choose from. For example, in the ancient era, you may have cultures like the Egyptians or the Babylonians. As you move through into, say, the medieval or the more modern era, you'll gain access to cultures, or again, civilizations, like, say, England or France. The only exception to this is when you first spawn in, you spawn in as a nomadic tribe. You don't have a culture as a nomadic tribe until you reach 10 science, until you discover 10 science from around the map, at which point you will transcend into the ancient era. And then you can choose, like I say, anyone from the Egyptians, to the Nubians, to the Olmecs, to the Chinese Zhao. There are lots of cultures to choose from, and each era presents new cultures. Okay, now we kind of understand what a culture is, and we're thinking about it as if it was a civilization. Now, what do cultures have that separate them from each other? This is very important, okay? First up, each culture has what's called an affinity. That grants them a very unique and specialized way to play their game, a very specific orientation with different effects and actions and so on and so forth, okay? So each culture has an affinity. They are either aesthetic, agrarian, builder, expansionist, merchant, military, and scientist. Now, I'm happy to break these down as individual videos, but for the purpose of this video, what you need to know is each culture has one of these affinities, and each affinity tends to shape that culture in a certain gameplay direction. For example, scientist affinities, cultures that have a scientific affinity, tend to produce more science and have unique buildings or units that provide science. Likewise, the aesthetic affinity is more favored towards influence and civics and diplomacy. The expansionist cultures are more favored towards either military or settling and claiming land and outposts. And as another example, the merchant affinity obviously is favored towards money and gold. So that's what those cultural affinities mean. What does an affinity provide you? Well, like I say, it provides you with certain benefits, but also it leads you into a certain direction. So you'll be able to produce more fame, more score, if you fulfill your culture's desired affinity. If you're a scientific culture, you'll earn better era stars and better score, better fame to ultimately win the game through science. The next element of cultures you need to understand is that each one has an emblematic unit, or EU, and an emblematic quarter, or EQ. Emblematic units are military units, generally, that are unique to that culture, and while you possess that culture, you can build those units. You can also build those units down the line if you choose to change your culture when you're moving from one era to another. Next, there are, as I say, emblematic quarters. These are like districts in Civilization 6. You place them down on the map around your city. However, with these, they must be generally adjacent to another quarter before you can place them down. There are some exceptions, for example, like a harbour, which can only be placed in the ocean. They do have certain limits around where you can place them. These buildings or quarters all produce different yields, and we'll go through some examples later so you can get a better feel for how this works. The thing to know about emblematic quarters is that they can only be built by the culture in its given era. So once you shift away from that era or shift to a different culture, you won't be able to build that emblematic quarter, that unique building, that unique district again. Okay? Something really important that you need to know about emblematic quarters is that they are unique to your cultural era that you're in. Next up, and most significantly perhaps, each culture has what's called a legacy trait, or LT. This is basically a unique bonus applied to that culture, it's generally a passive bonus, so it might be something like plus 10% food, or plus 20% science in the capital, something like that. What's important about the legacy trait is firstly that obviously it's incredibly strong, that you don't really need to do a lot to enact it, but crucially, it lasts for the rest of the game. Even after you transition into a different culture, assuming you transition into a different culture, different legacy traits stack across eras and across cultures. And that's one of the real strengths to changing your culture, for moving from the Egyptians to the Babylonians, or from the English to the Franks, or whatever, is that you're picking up more and more legacy traits that will remain within your civilization, within your empire, within, dare I say, humankind, for a really long time. In fact, forever, for the rest of the game. So it's really important to remember what legacy traits you've already got, and what other ones you might want to pick up moving forwards to create more of a synergetic strategy. That is fundamentally what culture is and how it works in humankind. And the takeaway from this first part of the video that I want you to have is think about culture and cultures like sieves, and think about your empire as something that can change, ebb and flow over time. You can pick up different cultures, keep them, transcend through eras, and keep that culture, or at each era you can choose to change your culture. The benefits, tips, and strategies around keeping a culture or changing to a different one, some of them are obvious and I've sort of covered them, but the rest of them will require a little bit more detail, so I'll leave that for a separate video. But what you need to know is, of course, when you change your culture, you'll pick up more legacy traits, but when you change your culture, you lose the ability to build their unique building, their unique emblematic quarter. So you might want to stay within your culture to ensure that you can build all those buildings in the cities if you didn't quite get to them. You might also want to stay if you're close to completing that culture's affinity. Let's say it has a scientific affinity. You might have researched a lot of texts and be earning a lot of era score towards science. And you might not want to change towards, say, a builder culture and lose all of that progress. Okay? All right. Now that we understand culture, or sieves, in humankind, let's go through some examples, talk about a little bit more about adopting versus transcending, but really get a feel for what do these cultures actually look like in practice. So here you can see I'm in the medieval era, and I'm choosing my next culture. Currently I'm the Greeks, okay, which are just one to the left of the Aztecs here. You can see if I'm looking at the Aztecs, I could choose to adopt. That would change my culture from Greek to Aztec into the new era. I can here choose to transcend. That will keep me within the Greek culture, so I can keep building the scientific building. I can get retain my method, but continue to build that amphitheatron and of course I'll keep the hoplites, but I would keep them regardless. So transcending here also has a vital role to play with fame. So if I transcend and choose to keep my same culture, I'll grant an additional plus 10% fame, or I should say I will be granted an additional 10% fame. But you can see there are lots of cultures to choose from. Here's the Khmer, the English for example. So if I change to them, I'll be able to build the stronghold. If I change to the Khmer, however, I can build their unique building, which provides +1 food per district, +1 industry per population, a little stability reduction. We're used to that. So you can see here that as I'm going through the eras, I'm looking really carefully at this ability as well, okay, this legacy trait, right? In this case, it's additional industry on farmers. And I'm thinking, well, I've got a lot of farmers' quarters already. If I take this culture, not only will those farmers' quarters be producing food, but they'll also be providing me with a lot of industry. Then I look at the unique building, the district, and I think I don't really need a stronghold. The longbowmen look pretty good, but I'm just not sold on the stronghold, but I really like that trait, and that's something I'll keep forever. So I'm thinking about it. I bring myself back to the Greeks, and then I bring myself back to the Aztecs, and you can see I'm looking through and I'm considering which benefit do I want the most, okay? Here we go, plus 50% food on city or outpost. That is massive. This building provides me with a bit of faith, science, and influence, and an additional research slot. So I'm really pretty fascinated with the Franks. I'm also quite fascinated with the Khmer. I like the food on districts. And I'm sort of thinking about also that in the multiplier for their legacy trait up the top there, you can see +2 industry per population working, an industry population, a market population. Here I'm going to select the Khmer. Once I hit confirm, all of those bonuses on the right will become mine, right? So the legacy trait will be mine forever, the building will be mine to build, and I'll have their unique unit also available forever. So I go confirm, and that's it. I've adopted the culture, and I've moved into the next era. Thank you very much for watching this breakdown discussion on what is culture in Humankind. I hope going away from this video you realize that cultures are civilizations. You can choose to adopt different ones as you progress through the eras, take on their abilities, take on their traits, and their unique units. During the era you have that culture, you'll also be able to build their unique district or building. However, afterwards, when you transcend into a new culture, you'll lose the ability to build that building, but you'll retain their legacy traits and their unique units. Thank you so much for watching. I do hope you learned something new, and for all content, Humankind, Civilization, and more, why not consider sticking around? We're a small but growing community, and we'd love to have you on board. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.